Like I read this book, The Elfstones of Shannara. It's an epic fantasy by Terry Brooks. Now, it's a old with a dog-eared book, and it looks like many people have read it. I got it from the library. And little about the author. He's an American writer of fantasy fiction. He writes mainly epic fantasy and has also written 2 film novelizations. And he has written 23 New York Times bestsellers during his writing career. And he has sold over 23 million copies of his books in print. He is one of the most successful living fantasy writers. That's Terry Brooks. And he says that one day in his early college life, he was given a copy of The Lord of the Rings by J.R. Tolkien, which inspired him to write in one genre. While Tolkien inspired the genre, Brooks stated during his TED talk, "Why I Write About Elves," as well as at the Charlotte Literary Festival, that he credits the inspiration of his style of writing to William Faulkner's work. With this inspiration, he then made his debut in 1977 with The Sword of Shannara. After finishing 2 sequels of The Sword of Shannara, Brooks moved on to the series, which would become known as the Landover novels. So he also has a television series based on the Shannara works entitled The Shannara Chronicles. It began showing on MTV in January 2016. The show starts with the second book of the original series, Elfstones. Actually, this is the one, Elfstones of the Shannara, as there are strong female roles which did not appear in the first book. So yeah, it is interesting as I went through the book. So, and also he wrote Why I Write About Elves, which was published in 2005. His views about novels versus short stories. He says, after writing Indomitable, a short story constituting an epilogue to the Wish Song of Shannara, Terry Brooks declares, "I find it much harder to write short stories and long fiction. I feel cramped by the lack of space and the dictates of the form. There is considerable difference in long and short fiction disciplines, and I'm not good with the latter. I hope not to have to do many more of them, but you never know. I must have written Indomitable anyway from 4 to 5 times, each effort different. Give me a 500-page sprawl as an assignment any day," he says. So he's very fond of writing novels, huge, long novels. Now this novel, The Elfstone of Shannara, is a 1982 epic fantasy novel by him. It is the first sequel of The Sword of Shannara and the second book in the original Shannara trilogy. It expands upon the history of the elves, which was only hinted at in the preceding story, and follows Will Ormsford, grandson of Shea, the hero of the first book, and inheritor of the Shannara Elfstones. So, and the illustrator is Darrell K. Sweet. Cover artist is also Darrell K. Sweet. And of course, the genre is epic fantasy, as you can see as you go through it. And the publication date is 1982 in the United States. So pages are around 576, and it is a mass market paperback, as you can see. The novel is set in a fictional world called the Four Lands, consisting of two intertwining plotlines. The first plotline follows the quest of protagonist Will Ormsford and Amber Elsadil, maybe I'm not pronouncing it correctly, to create a new Elfgrace, a magical tree that serves to banish all demons from the Four Lands. To do this, they must locate a specific place in the Four Lands called Safehold, where the process of creating a new Elfgrace can begin. Okay. The second plotline focuses on the efforts of the Elvian army and their allies to slow a massive demon invasion made possible by the dying of the current Elfgrace, to give Will and Amberly enough time to complete their quest. So the plot is something like that before the dawn of mankind was the age of fairy, an era from which many powerful spirits, such as the king of the Silver River, came. The elves, extremely long lived and possessing great magic, created the Elfstones as a necessary balance to the light. Darkness was also created in the beginning of time, but anyways, the Shannara series is set in a world, the post-apocalyptic world called the Four Lands. This world is a futuristic version of our own, and not a secondary world. The Genesis of Shannara trilogy reveals the Four Lands to be located in modern Pacific Northwest region of the United States and Canada. Much of the landscape has been changed by a future nuclear holocaust called the Great Wars, but some landmark remains. For example, the Columbia River still exists. Each land is named after the compass point it faces: the Northland, the Southland, the Eastland, and the Westland, and is the primary home of different people. The Westland is the homeland primarily of the elves, while the Northland is mostly inhabited by trolls, and the Eastland is the home mostly to dwarves and gnomes. The Southland is primarily the homeland of humans. And you will find the maps given, the Northland, which is very interesting. You must read the book and see for yourself. And if talking about the characters, there's something known as someone, Alanon, described as Brooks' most enigmatic character, is a very secretive and the last remaining druid of the original order. Trained by Bremen, he lived an unexpectedly long life, being the druid that summons the Ormsford family during the original trilogy. Sword, Elfstones, and Wish Song. He is never completely honest, telling many white lies or half-truths, and provides others with information only if it is dangerous, crucial, or required. Alanon, often called in the end of the Ormsford family in the novels, as they are descendants of the Shannara and therefore the only ones who can use the sword of Shannara. He called upon Shia Ormsford in the Sword of Shannara, Will Ormsford in the Elfstones of Shannara, and Brian and Jair Ormsford in the Witch Song of Shannara. Then there is another character as Galafel, who was an elf who was responsible in the creation of the Druids. Meeting at Paranor, it was he that believed that the Druids shouldn't belong to any one race, so they became separated from the people. Now, talking about the Druids are the order of historians, philosophers, magic users, teachers, and researchers. The greatest mind that remained in the Four Lands were first assembled by Galafel at the fortress of Paranor. Druid magic, like most of the magic that originates in the Four Lands, is elemental. It draws from the earth air, fire, and water in various forms. The power is enhanced or weakened by the strength of the user. Some users would find more success with talismans like the sword of the Elfstones than others. Sometimes the magic of a talisman or an external source links with the magic innate in a user, causing various results. Unlike science, magic is uncertain and the results of its application are not always predictable. Then there's another character, the Warlock Lord, was formerly a druid named Brona, who was removed from the walls of Paranor for studying and practicing forbidden magic found in an ancient Sentian tome called the Eladish. He and his followers then inhabited the Skull Kingdom deep in the Northland. Then there is a King of the Silver River, a fairy creature who appears throughout the series. Then you have the Skull Bearers, were druids once upon a time, but they were subverted by the Edach along with the druid Brona, who would later become the Warlock Lord. They sacrificed their humanity to become winged black destroyers, but in doing this, they tied themselves to their master, the Warlock Lord, and became his dread minions. Reviewers and critics have mixed opinions on the Skull Bearers. Praise for them comes from Frank Herbert, the author of Dune, who liked all of the monsters in the Sword of Shannara. He said that Terry Brooks creates distillations of horror that hark back to childhood's shadow, when the most important thing about a fearful creature was that you didn't know its exact shape and intent. You only knew that it wanted you. The black-winged skull bearer, for instance, is more than a euphemism for death. Tom Shippey wasn't so positive, as he thought that the skull bearers were very familiar to those who had read The Lord of the Rings. He found that the skull bearers were analogues for the Nazgûl. Then we have demons. Demons is a common name for many different creatures in novels by Terry Brooks. They are creatures that were trapped inside the forbidding after the creation of the Alkrais. Then you have the Dagda Mor is the antagonist of the Elfstone of Shannara. He is the most powerful of demons locked inside the forbidding. As such, most of the others obey him out of fear, with a few notable exceptions, such as the Reaper. He channels his magic through his staff of power. Shia Omsford is the protagonist of the Sword of Shannara. He has the blood of Jerry Shannara, making him the only one who can wield the powerful Sword of Shannara to vanquish the Warlock Lord. A major theme of the Sword of Shannara revolves around Shia. Part of his quest, in addition to killing the Warlock Lord, includes finding a belief in himself so that he will have confidence to go on. This is a search for every subsequent Brooks protagonist must undergo. Scholar Tom Shippey believed that Shia was too familiar to those who had read The Lord of Rings. He found the Shia and Flick were analogues for the hobbits of Tolkien's stories. Terry Brooks stated in his autobiography that his protagonists, Shia and Flick, are cut from the same bolt of cloth as Bilbo and Frodo Baggins. Then there are others also. Like for example, you have the Great Jax is known as the Weapons Master. Garrett first appears when he rescues Jair Ormsford from a band of 9 gnome hunters, defeating 8 of them single-handedly. He killed 6, knocked out their leader, and 1 fled. This 9th slanter doesn't even attempt to fight, saying that he was only working with them because he had to, and he has heard stories about the fighting prowess of Garrett. Terry Brooks expressed his desire in the beginning of The Dark Wraith to further explore the relationship between Jer and Garrett Jacks. Then you have Cogline is the grandfather of Kimber, and then you have Will Ormsford is the grandson of Sheer Ormsford, one who would forsake his birthright. He sought to become a healer, studying amongst the stores of Storlock. He unwillingly became the protector of the chosen Amberley after being sought out by Halanon on the quest to restore the Elkrise and reseal the crumbling wall of the Forbidding. Then you have Eventide Elasidi is possibly the greatest 11 king, maybe with the exception of Jerry Shannara. He is the backbone that the elves need to withstand the attacks of the Warlock Lorden, the Sword of Shannara, and the demon hordes in the Elfstones of Shannara. So there we have Mom is snoring away to glory. Yeah. Anyways, so I continue on. So I'm going to read from the back cover. Ancient evil threatens the elves for Elkrise. The tree created by long-last 11 magic is dying, losing the spell of forbidding that bars the hordes of vengeful demons from the races of man. Eleanor, legendary guardian of earth, summons Will Ormsford to guard the elven girl Amberley, a perilous quest as she carries a seed from the Elfries to the mysterious Bloodfire, there to be quickened into a new Elkrise. Ravening behind them comes the Reaper, most fearsome of all demons, and against it Will has only the Elfstones of Shannara, and he has lost all power to control them. Helplessly he watches the shadow of the Reaper appear on the trail before him. Here are valiant companions, awesome foes, wonders, and the ancient mystery of how the elves survived. Once again, Terry Brooks brings us an epic novel of wonder and adventure in this eagerly awaited sequel of the best-selling The Sword of Shannara. So I'll read a few lines. This is page 1. The night sky brightened faintly in the east with the approach of dawn as the Chosen entered the Gardens of Life. The Chosen were the caretakers of the Elkrise, the strange and wondrous tree that had stood at the center of the gardens. The tree, as the legends told, that served as protector against a primordial evil that had very nearly destroyed the elves centuries ago, an evil that had been shut away from the earth since before the dawn of the old race of men. In all the time that had followed, they had been chosen to care for the Elkrise. Theirs was a tradition handed down through generations of elves, a tradition of service that the elves regarded as both a coveted honor and a solemn duty. So I'm reading from random pages, page 74. So the war was fought, a terrible, monstrous war that I will not even attempt to describe, for there would be no point in doing so. For our purpose here, it is only important that you know that the evil ones were defeated, their power was broken, and they were driven back and finally trapped. And then he says the strength behind the forbidding was a marvelous tree called the Elkrise. The creature of good created the Elkrise out of the earth's life source, which they called the Bloodfire, and out of their own power they gave her life so that by her presence in the world the forbidding might endure long after they themselves were gone, long after the world they had struggled so long and desperately to perceive had altered and evolved beyond any recognition. Her lifespan was not to be measured by any standard that they possessed, but so long as she lived, the forbidding continued, and so long as the forbidding continued, the evil would remain shut within its prison. So I'm reading from page 76. He says, all were creatures that became part of the old legends of fairy when men emerged from the darkness of barbarianism and began to populate and build upon the world. They were creatures of magics. As I have said, both great and small. They were diverse species, some all good, some all bad, some whose individual people divided and went in opposite ways. They had traits, they had names that you will recognize. It is fairies, spirits, then goblins, wraiths, and the like. The new race, though human in ancestries, were named from four of the more numerous and best recorded of these creatures of supposed legend: dwarves, gnomes, trolls, and elves. Except, of course, that the elves are different. They are different because they are not simply a legend reborn, they are the legend survived. The elven people are the descendants of the fairy creatures and that existed in the old world. So page 169. It was midnight when the howl of the demon wolves rose out of the stillness of the grassland, shrill, hungry, and filled with hatred. Moments later, the howls behind them rose in a frenzy. The demon wolves had found their camp. Will put Artak into a full gallop. Artak is the name of the horse. The demons would come quickly now, certain that their prey was close ahead, knowing that they could be caught. Cries north and east of them sounded in answer to those behind, shrill and ragged as the hunters began to run. Artak was sweating, his head extended forward, his ears laid back. The grassland thinned into barren scrub. They had crossed into the Strelin hymn. The valley of Ren could not be far. Will stretched himself low over Artak's straining neck and urged the gallant horse onwards. Reading from page 171. See the language, the way he writes. It's very gripping, very vivid, very well written. Page 334. For an instant, the demons stood their ground, shrieking with rage and hate, tearing at the madmen who thrust so recklessly into their midst. But the big man with the broadsword and the free corps battle standard had given fresh courage to the elves, courage that bore them forward to face death without fear, to forget everything but their determination to destroy utterly those twisted black forms that stood before them. The demons wavered and fell back slowly at first, then in headlong flight, for the fury generated within the army of the elves was much greater now than their own. Into the hills north they fled once more, scrambling down from the slopes of the Kenstrove, through the rocks and crags of the draw, flying into the concealing shadows of the night. So you see the way he writes, just wonderful. So must read, it's a must read, it's a easy read, and it's a fast read. Enjoy. So that's Elfstones of Shannara, and it has been 16 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Good read.